Every day, you and I get bombarded with negative news. And just like our bodies becomes what we eat, our minds become the information that we consume. If you want to stay positive, it's so important that you also listen to stories that inspires you and uplifts you. In this podcast, we interview world-leading experts dedicated to solving the world's most pressing problems. And if you stick around, I promise you will not only be as informed as if you watch the news, you will feel uplifted, inspired, and have more positive energy in your life. Welcome to Great.com Talks with. Hi and welcome. Today, Great.com talks with Todd Myers, who is the Environmental Director for WashingtonPolicy.org. And if you haven't heard of them before, the Washington Policy Center is an independent, nonprofit think tank that promotes sound public policy based on free market solutions. And we're going to get into more of that. But if you're new here, you definitely want to press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because today we're going to talk about policy and how we can set policies that would help our global climate. Todd, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with Great today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
Me too, and especially talking about the environment, since Great is an organization that is very involved in the climate crisis. So before we get there, how would you describe Washington Policy to someone that is not familiar with your organization?
So we're based in Seattle, which is in the northwest corner of the United States in Washington State. We are a public policy think tank. And so we work with local and sometimes federal legislators to look at policies. We have a number of different people. I work on the environment, but we have people who work on transportation and taxes and healthcare. Our healthcare expert is a former heart surgeon. So we have people who look at all of those areas. And our focus is in making not just good policy, but finding ways to harness the power of individuals in markets to do good things for the environment or anything else. It's sometimes forgotten how powerful free markets can be in giving people the ability to do things that it's sometimes difficult for government to do. So I've worked in government. I used to work at the Washington State Department of Natural Resources in Washington State, where I dealt with forestry and old growth forests. And now I work with salmon recovery issues in Washington State. So I am very involved in government. I believe in the power of government to do good things, but I also know there are limitations. And one of the things that we try to focus on is where government has limitations, what are the other options for making good progress? And in the environmental arena, there are a ton of really cool things that we can do.
Right. So you guys identify where the policies cannot go all the way, and instead there needs to be free market solutions. And of course, there are limitations then with the environment. So what would those free market solutions be? How would that look like?
So one of the things that we've done in the United States and actually across Europe and the world is that where government was really good is when there were large sources of pollution. So big smokestacks or outfalls into the water. And across Europe and the United States, the amount of pollution, air pollution and water pollution over the last 50 years has really declined rapidly. And it's because of government policies and government agencies going to those smokestacks, saying don't pollute, going to big outfalls into the water, limiting pollution. Where government has had a harder time is where pollution is distributed. So little bits of oil, little bits of brake dust, little bits of fertilizer that get into the water and cause algae blooms. Or with regard to the climate, the fact that all of us use energy and we all emit a little bit of CO2, but it's everybody. It's not just a few single things. And those distributed problems where everybody plays a small role are much more difficult for government to address. And it's important to use markets and technology to empower people to make differences in our own lives. So I'll give you an example. So there are smart thermostats like Google Nest or Ecobee, which is a company out of Canada that allows you to set your thermostat, and then it uses artificial intelligence to figure out the most efficient way to keep your house warm or cool at the right times, so that you're not using too much electricity. And in some cases that you're actually using electricity when renewables are available, such as in the middle of the day, rather than at peak time, which is in the early evening when everybody turns on their lights and you have to rely on natural gas and coal. And so simply by using that technology to shift our demand to when wind and solar are available, as opposed to when natural gas and coal are available, it can make a big difference in how people use electricity and our environmental impact.
I think that's a real clear example. So you're showing the individual user how they can use this technology so it can benefit them. But it makes me think, just to test this idea a little bit, couldn't government also do exactly the same effect just by putting in laws that, okay, maybe raising taxes when you have to use coal, or, do big scale change, kind of forcing people to use those solutions?
So that there, yes and no. I think I agree with you in that you price what you don't want. And so one of the things we have talked about is that if you want to reduce CO2 emissions, putting a simple price on it, and I would prefer to reduce taxes elsewhere so that you don't get a tax backlash, which is what you see in a lot of different places when you raise carbon taxes. But if you put a price on it, what you tell people is, look, we don't care how you reduce CO2. We just want you to do it. And if you do it, you will be rewarded. And for each person, that means something different. Some people who drive a lot will buy a more fuel efficient vehicle, or they'll buy an electric vehicle. If you don't drive a lot, then maybe a smart thermostat is a way to go. But each person is different in how they use electricity, how they emit CO2, and simple and clear signals that are personalizable are more effective than top-down approaches. And I'll give you a good example. Here in the United States, and I think in Europe too, we've mandated what are called green building standards for a number of different schools and other buildings built by government. And what I found is when I looked at the schools, and this is not just in Washington State, but in many states across the United States, that the schools actually ended up using more energy per square foot than the previous buildings. And the reason is that the requirements of the schools were not suited to the demands of those schools individually. So what you really want to do is find technologies, find behaviors that are suited to each individual and give them the technology to do that. Nobody wants to spend money on gasoline. Nobody wants to spend money on electricity. You want to keep it in your pocket. You want to go to the movies and, buy popcorn. So if we can do that, people will react. We have seen it. It's been very effective. And what's exciting is that because of smartphones, there are now more and more technologies and tools to do that. People have more power. 50 years ago, when we started really taking the environment seriously, cleaning our air, cleaning our water, government was really the only way to do that. We didn't have the technology to do that. Now we do. We shouldn't forget that people are a powerful force to help the environment.
It feels empowering to give that power back into the individual, because otherwise you're just going to have to hope that someone up in the top is doing some positive changes. So speaking of excitement, like what other technologies do you see that are coming out from, I don't know, your think tank or wherever they are coming from that you would love for more people to start implementing?
So I've mentioned a couple. I mentioned the smart thermostats, which I think are very good. You can do the same thing actually for water. There are now little things that you can hook up to your water main to your house, and it will track your water usage on your phone. So one side effect, it's not addressing carbon dioxide directly, but it is addressing an impact of climate change, which is drought. And so we all need to use water more carefully. In the United States, 10% of water use for households is simply waste, simply running toilets or other things like that. And now there's a little tool that syncs to your phone where it will track your water use and tell you when you are wasting water, tell you when a toilet is running, things like that, so you can stop that. So that's a tool that anybody can use. I have in my house a little box that I have put called a Sense Monitor that hooks up to my electrical box. And it uses artificial intelligence to track what appliances I'm using and where my electricity is going. I'm an energy geek. I pay attention to this a lot. But when I put it in my box, it started telling me, oh, the lights in your kitchen are using a tremendous amount of electricity. I never would have thought that the lights in my kitchen were using so much. So I went out, I bought LED light bulbs. It went down to about 10% of what it was before. Simply providing the information about how we use electricity, where we can save money, can make a big difference. And there are a growing number of these types of tools if you look for them.
That's really cool, because those solutions are so scalable as well. And when those technology gets better, everybody's benefiting. So
that's right. And one of the things that Europe does really well about electricity that the United States does less well is charge rates based on time of day. So there is a utility in the UK called Octopus, and they have a plan where you can pay rates based on demand. And it's cheap during the day when solar is available, and cheap during the nighttime when wind tends to be available in the UK, but very expensive during the peak hours of 4 to 6 p.m. When they're using natural gas and coal. And so you can use the electricity then, but there is a strong incentive for you to shift your demand. And so they have that price system built in, like you talked about. You give a price incentive to move away from CO2 intensive electricity. And other places in Europe do the same thing. And that's fantastic because, as I said, it rewards people for doing more with less. That is an area where public policy and government can make a difference. It's not that government can't make a difference, but where government makes the best difference is that it sends clear signals to people about, if you reduce your CO2 emissions, you will save money, and then let people decide. And I think Europe is ahead of the United States on that.
Yeah, I like that approach as well, with its clear signals. So now when we got a government shift in the US, how is that going to change things moving forward for the environment, and how individuals as well can start applying these new technologies?
I hope that there is a focus on empowering people and not relying on top-down solutions. One of the challenges, I've been working in environmental policy for more than 20 years. And one of the frustrations I have about politicians making these decisions is that they tend to choose the policies that feel good, not the ones that are most effective. So in Western Washington, near Seattle, where I live, we are most famous for our rain. If you know anything about Seattle, you know it rains a lot here. And yet in Washington State, we subsidize rooftop solar. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the United States ranks Western Washington as literally the worst place in the lower 48 United States for solar. And yet we spend a lot of money on it. It's a very ineffective way to reduce CO2 emissions, but people like solar, right? It feels like free electricity. And so rather than focusing our resources and regulations on things that are most effective, we focus it on things that feel good. I'm worried that the Biden administration will do the same thing. They've made a lot of promises about picking and choosing particular technologies. I think it would be much better if they took the approach that just said, look, CO2 is important. We need to reduce it. Let's find ways to do it the most effective way that are personalizable, that use technology. Unfortunately, I don't think they're going to go that route. I have hope, but I'm skeptical at this point based on what they're saying. I just think that that's going to be more effective in the long run than we've seen.
And what would those solutions look like? Would it be financing, projects that are hyper effective at getting CO2 out of the atmosphere, or what would it look like?
So what we have recommended in Washington State, and our local legislature is about to start, and what I simply have recommended is to take the money that you were going to use to subsidize solar, and just put it into a pool and say, all right, if you have a project that reduces CO2 emissions effectively, tell us what it is and how much it costs per metric ton of CO2, and then we will give grants to the people who do it the best. So, for instance, methane capture. Landfills create methane when they decompose. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. Capturing it is a very effective and inexpensive way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Much better than, in Washington State at least, subsidizing solar. So if I was going to take the money from solar and put it somewhere, I would put it into methane capture. I'd get a heck of a lot more benefit to the environment for a lot less money. That seems like a win-win. And one of the reasons you get pushback on environmental policies is because people are worried about government overreach, and people are worried about the cost of taxes and other things like that. If we can tell people, look, we're achieving this goal, but we're doing it for much less, I think a lot of people who are concerned about the environment but are worried about government overreach can say, okay, I like this. This achieves the goal of reducing greenhouse gases, but it does it in a cost-effective way. I think bringing those two things together is really powerful.
Yeah, and being able to communicate it as well, because those solar panels are so visible, but no one sees what goes on in the dump over there. And
That's
that
right.
methane is some gas, we don't even see it. So
that's right, exactly.
I'm happy to give a voice to people who speaks the language of effectiveness. So tell me then, what are the next steps for Washington policy? Like what do you guys hope to accomplish in the next 10 years?
10 years is a long time. One of the things that's amazing about public policy is that people forget that the iPhone is barely 10 years old. Think about how much the world has changed in 10 years because of the iPhone. That makes it hard to make policy in 10 years. But the exciting thing about that is think of the new opportunities that technology provides. 3 years from now, we could be doing very different things than we are today for the environment, which is why I get frustrated when people say, oh, we need to rely on government. Only they can do things at scale. People can't. I say, look what we've done in the last 10 years just with the iPhone. So for us, our near-term goal is just to try to focus policies on effectiveness, making sure that we are getting every amount of greenhouse gases reduced that we can for the least cost. Governments are not made of money, right? We've just gone through COVID. Governments are struggling with taxes. We should spend every dollar to get the most bang for the buck. So that's our near-term goal. Our long-term goal is to try to get people to engage more of these personal technology solutions and markets to do what I think, as I said before, government struggles to do with these sort of distributed environmental problems. That doesn't mean that government has no role. It clearly does have a role. But I think that where we are now is that the personal role, the role of individuals, is being overlooked. And since individuals are more empowered, have more ability to do good things than ever before with technology, that needs to come to the fore.
Beautiful. I couldn't agree more. And we're coming up to the end of this interview now. So I'm curious how someone can keep following Washington policy, but I'm also curious if you could give someone a step-by-step, the most important action steps they can take today to, as individuals, be empowered and have a positive impact for the climate.
So our webpage is washingtonpolicy.org. As I said, we are focused on local issues primarily, but the things that we do in Washington State are often exported elsewhere or tried here. So a lot of things that your listeners will see us talk about, they will be foreign to them because we are local, but they will also see a lot of things that are familiar and lessons things that we do that they can learn from and apply in their own part of the world. In terms of taking steps, I think the first thing I tell people is give yourself permission to make mistakes, right? Try things, see if they work. Get a smart thermostat, do other things. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, or if you find out later that it's counterproductive, then change. I think one of the problems that we have is that we believe that we have to find the right answer. And there's no the right answer. There are a million little things. Rather than doing one thing 100% better, do 100 things 1% better, and you'll make a big difference. And so that's what I would encourage people, is just to change their mindset about how to make an environmental difference.
Beautiful. So take a step. It doesn't have to be the perfect step. Love it. Todd, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with Great.com today. I very much appreciate it.
It's been very nice to talk with you.
It was fun. And I felt like I learned a lot about Yeah, I've seen the importance of, I've known that energy prices is different during different times of the day, but I haven't understood that a intelligent AI can do all of the heavy thinking for me. So thank you so much for that. And for you listening, if you enjoyed this episode and you found it valuable, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app. That is a signal to the algorithms that this is an important conversation. So more people can hear about how they can be empowered as individuals and make the climate better for everyone. Thank you so much for listening, and we see you in the next episode.